How was the universe made? Why was it made? Why are we here? And why is there so much wrong in the world? Hello everyone, I am Cameron Weston, as you can probably see under this title here, and today I'm going to be discussing with you some of the creation narratives of the ancient Near East. Now, as it turns out, all ancient Near Eastern cultures had a pretty broad perspective on the creation of the earth. But they all coincidentally and significantly come in one iconic form, the creation story. All ancient Near Eastern cultures have their own creation story. Well, everyone does, really, but the ancient Near Eastern ones are rather interesting. Specifically, the image to the left is the Babylonian creation story. Here we have the creator god Marduk, who is cutting apart the pieces of his evil mother, Tiamat, and using those pieces to create the universe. And to the image on the right of that, we have the Epic of Atrahasis, which is the creator god, to start off with, needed help creating the universe, so he required the usage of lesser gods to make the universe. Now, a cool thing to understand about the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew culture as a whole, was actually a relative latecomer compared to all of these. And its main point it wanted to make was that God is supreme. This is a very God-fearing culture. They only believed in one, and that he was the most powerful God. He needed no help or pre-existing material in order to make the universe. So throughout this scripture of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, basically just demonstrates God's power, most of all, while giving its people the idea of how the universe was created. So today we will be discussing more on the Hebrew creation story. So their concept of rain was a rather interesting one to me. So before we begin that though, I want to note that the Hebrew Bible labels 6 original days of creation. The 7th one was about rest. But the first 3 were about establishing the 3 realms of the earth: sky, water, and earth. Now, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And it's actually a cool little rhyming verse when you read the actual scripture. It's pronounced tohu vavohu, which means unordered and uninhabited. Now, to separate darkness from light, since the sun wasn't created yet, God himself moved upon the face of the waters, separating day from night. Then on day 2, he says, let there be a vault between the waters. Let there be a vault between the waters. And it was so, obviously, because now we have the sky. But one funny thing that I've discovered, that the ancient Hebrews, they knew rain came from the sky, but they thought that it just dripped from a giant ocean above the sky, which is what this image kind of represents. Now, it was, like I said, it was a pretty funny concept, but it is interesting to be a Hebrew and be like, oh, there's a giant ocean above here. And of course, it wasn't until later that they found out that it wasn't. I mean, technically there is because of the clouds, but I digress. Now, the next thing for the universe was to fill it. So we have, after that, land was created. So now, and all the fruits and plants, and according to its various kind, were also put on the land. So we have all 3 realms established. Now, we have to fill it. Now he had left to fill them. So on day 4, he said, "Let there be lights to fill the sky." That's when he made the sun, moon, and stars. These would not only govern light from darkness, but also mark the seasons, days, and years, and help keep time. This also, of course, relates to our Bible. And the next, he created the sea creatures and the birds on day 5. And then day 6, he said, "Let the land produce living creatures, which were made out of the earth," just like we were. But God favored us when he said, "Let us make man in our own image, in our own likeness." Now this literally just means God's character. He doesn't necessarily mean a physical image, because God does not have an image. But anyway, he created this human and literally named it Adam. In the Hebrew Bible, it's pronounced Adam, which translates to Adam. And then on the 7th day, the day after that, God rested and said, "Remember this day and keep it holy." The number 7 is also very significant, specifically for this day. It's a holy day for the for the ancient Near Eastern Hebrews. Because on that day, they didn't work. It was forbidden to work on this day, solely for this purpose, to honor God's resting. Now, and another thing that they also thought about was how the universe was better then, as God originally intended it, than when they sinned and the way it is now. Because now they have to work to toil the earth. And they use this, of course, to explain it. Like I said, it's very similar to our Jewish and Christian culture today, but actually less strict than Jewish culture, but more strict than Christianity. It's a weird in-between with this culture. So now we move on, and Adam has gone to the Garden of Eden and has named all the animals, and he realizes that unlike all the animals, he has no mate, no one to help him in the garden. So God, of course, lays Adam to sleep, takes his rib in his sleep, leaving no mark behind, and from that rib makes a woman. Now, the scripture of the Torah labels women as a secondary creation compared to Adam, leading to the conclusion that it was a very patriarchal society. It was the men that determined the choices of the family and how they would live, and made all the decisions of the house. Of course, this is very unlike our culture today, and for a good reason it was changed. But it's a good thing to know, to study the culture. So they move on to it wasn't until later in the Bible, the Hebrew Bible along with ours, that Adam just called her Eve at the end of Eden, the story of Eden. Originally, she was just called the woman. She had no name until they sinned and thus had to leave the garden. Which leads us to our next topic. Now, I actually had a theory about the concept of the serpent. I've been doing a lot of research, also in the book of Isaiah, that the serpent wasn't necessarily a living creature that the devil possessed in order to tempt Eve, but rather was a spiritual being. For example, Isaiah says in his vision that beside the throne of God, hovering around the throne of God, were a bunch of winged creatures singing praise and offering homage to him. Now, in the text, the Hebrew text, Isaiah describes these as seraphim, which literally translates to burning serpents or fiery serpents, who flew around God's throne praising praising him. So this leads me to my two theories. One, the serpent was either a corrupt version of the seraphim, or was the devil disguised as a seraphim. Either way, he was able to tempt Eve in this form. So she's like, oh wow, it's a cool new creature, it can talk just like me. And thus she ate the apple and, well, she ate the fruit. It wasn't necessarily an apple. Although Latin culture actually had a hand in this because the same word for apple was evil. Funny thing about that. And either way, after she ate the fruit, she then convinced her husband to eat it. And when God cursed the serpent in the end, after he discovered what they had done, what went down, it wasn't necessarily legs that he took from him, but wings, as a symbol of his angelic form being stripped away. I mean, it was before, even in this text, but this is just a theory I've had. If you have different thoughts about it, let me know. Anyway, this marks the end of the creation of the Hebrew Bible. So after Adam and Eve leave the garden, it all boils down to one question. Would men follow God, or would they follow the devil and his rebellion? Like I said, this basically has a lot more to do with our culture, or just as much as it has just as much to do with our culture today as Jewish and Christian culture does now. So thank you guys for watching. Be sure to leave me questions at the bottom. And I hope you enjoyed. God bless.